Xander Ridgeford, Strater General, November 29th, Earth Year 2103. As a rule, planets generally weren't hard to find. Even unmapped stars were easy enough to set flight coordinates to. The biggest issue in getting to most planets was how long it took. Though traveling through subspace exponentially shortened distances between points in real space, it didn't entirely eliminate them. This, too, was determined by Archeron's law, meaning I couldn't explain the mechanics if I tried. At best, I could trust that Meg's flight computer would do its job. Like I said, planets weren't generally hard to find, but Quar was an exception. Launched in its infancy from the orbit of its home star, likely as a result of a migrating gas giant, Quar had been wandering this galaxy for the past 5 billion years at least. It moved at a comparatively glacial 0.000005 c. C is the speed of light. While on a cosmic scale that's pretty slow, it's still about 4 times the speed of sound. Because it has no true orbit and is still affected by the gravity of nearby stars, a ridiculously long equation is required to find the damn thing. Fortunately, when I first met with their representative, our benefactor had gifted me with a thumb drive containing precisely that equation. Our 3-day journey following the successful raid was rife with celebration. Beta Team managed to raid an entire commercial-scale brewery, meaning that we had plenty to drink following this mission, and probably the next 20 that would follow it. Some who participated in the raid drank to their health and the hope they'd survive the next one too. Others drank to the memory of those we lost during the chaos of battle. Looking at things from a detached perspective, a 5% casualty rate wasn't half bad, but the grim reality was a lot more apparent when you read the actual numbers. 156 brave humans had given their lives to the cause, and for every last one of them, I'd make 1,000 Xenos suffer. Much as I wanted to get drunk like everyone else who participated in the raid, I had an important meeting that I couldn't afford to be anything less than my best for. As for the humans who stayed on the ship, they were responsible for helping the 400 or so we rescued. Of that number, over half were children. Those who weren't old enough or brave enough to fight would have to find other ways to be useful to us. Most would end up working in the Megalodon's factories, melting down scrap to turn it into things we needed. 3 days a week the children would work, and for 3 more they'd be educated in math and practical science. Those who proved themselves capable would be taught non-Arcturian machining and medicine. It wasn't a glamorous life by any means, but it was the best I could give them, and I rallied hard to keep that 7th day free for them. Whereas the rank and file primarily partied in the lower decks, me and my most important underlings held our own meeting/celebration on the bridge. "How are we looking for supplies?" I asked Avery, who was busy punching in numbers on a calculator. "We were able to load 3 cargo vessels with food," she informed me, momentarily looking up from her task before returning her attention to the calculator. Omega Team managed to steal a good chunk of hydroponics equipment. Once we have everything installed in a few months, we'll be halfway to food self-sufficiency. Epsilon Team filled another ship with medical supplies. Barring an outbreak, we should be golden for the foreseeable future. I liked the sound of that, at least. Next I turned to Eddie, our Minister of Propaganda. "How are things on your front?" I asked. Eddie used to be a soldier just like the rest, but the stories he wrote as a hobby were popular the whole fleet over, and I decided the sizable morale he generated was more valuable than the firepower of a single soldier, so I promoted him. "Thanks to you, sir?" "They couldn't be better!" He laughed, raising a glass into the air to toast me before downing it. "Every human in the fleet who can read loves our digital magazine. The plays we put on are a hit, and thanks to our meticulous documentation of your heroic exploits, our next generation of soldiers will understand the awesome power of mankind and the faithfulness of their great leader." I'll admit, there was some part of me that felt kind of dirty having a propaganda department. But when you're dealing with thousands of humans, there's really no better way to keep them all in line. Good work. If you need any extra actors for your plays, I'm sure some of our new rescues would be more than happy to help. "Ridgeford," interrupted our head engineer, anxiously smoothing back the quills on his arms. "I hate to ruin this celebration, really I do, but need I remind you about the ship's FTL drive?" Parak was the only non-human I counted as worthy to be part of the upper echelon. He was a sympathetic voice for humanity from the very start, participating in multiple debates in favor of human independence, while also attempting to teach some of them the law himself. Sadly, he failed in that regard, and has spent the past 17 or so years trying to make up for it. "How much longer can you keep her running?" I asked. Much as I liked Parak, I still couldn't shake the feeling he didn't respect me as a leader. Few people on the ship had permission to call me by my last name, and he wasn't one of them. "I can buy you a week. After that, we'll be playing that human game with the one bullet in the gun, but with thousands of people on the line." "Russian roulette," interrupted Avery, providing the head engineer with the information he'd been missing. Though privately I questioned Parak's loyalty, I never brought it up with Avery. I saw the way she looked at the Inzar mail, and she visited the engineering deck a hell of a lot more than was necessary for her role. Nevertheless, I had no reason to doubt her allegiance, so for the time I figured I'd leave the pair alone. My other lieutenants had very little of interest to say to me, and as such I soon retired to my room, leaving the rest of the meeting to my second-in-command. That night I dreamt, as I so often did, of Earth. After subjugating mankind, the Xenos turned Sol III into one massive and heavily policed nature preserve. One day, I promised myself, we would return to reclaim our ancestral homeland and kill every last alien bastard that took it from us. Awakening the next morning and taking a long, hot shower, I equipped my finest clothes and stepped out onto the bridge. The subtle hum of descent that had awoken me amplified into a furious shaking as the megalodon hurtled through Quar's hydrogen atmosphere. "Edabula!" I called through the secured channel, my utterance of the passcode clearing us to land. When at last the ship jolted upon contact with the ground, I stood by the airlock to await transport. Though primarily composed of hydrogen, Quar's atmosphere retained enough oxygen to be breathable for humans, allowing me to step outside on the planet without an environmental suit. Once we got confirmation that Wibbick's men were outside, I entered the passcode to let myself out and followed them into the old guard's base. Due to its lack of apparent star, Quar was a planet primarily bathed in total darkness. In this near pitch black, the brilliant lights of the base shone like a lifeline. Following the runway lights, I made my way inside with the guards and followed them to the conference room where Wibbick and I would speak. When Wibbick first contacted me, the Straighters were on a crash course with annihilation. We didn't have the resources nor the information to fight against the Council, and I was a hair's breadth away from offering myself up in exchange for my crew being spared the needle. It was old guard information that led us to our flagship, and we've had a pretty great arrangement with them ever since. They gave us weapons and info, and we in return acted as iron fist beneath their velvet glove. "The problem with a government for the weak," my old guard contact had told me when we first met at this very table, "is that it inevitably becomes a government by the weak. Sapients like you and I, we're mavericks. By trying to limit the influence of true visionaries, the Council only hobbles itself." "Xander!" chimed the Kafalt happily, his bizarrely cat-like face twisting to present a parody of a human smile. "A pleasure as always, dear friend. Can I get you something to drink?" "I'll take a whiskey," I shrugged, prompting Wibbick to approach a nearby cupboard and retrieve 2 small glasses alongside a thick-bodied bottle of golden-brown liquid. Pouring a glass for me and then one for himself, my friend placed the bottle in front of me before plopping himself down on the other side of the conference table. "Your latest raid is all over galactic news. I trust you've retrieved the files we requested?" he began, gesturing with his claws for me to hand them over. "Just like you asked," I replied, producing the papers acquired and sliding them over to Wibbick for a closer look. "And of course you don't have to worry about Gorekaj. He's dead." "Fine work as always," purred the Kafalt, sifting through the files before setting them down and returning his attention to me. "I'm sure the leaders of Zilth and Egex will be thrilled to have a tax-free year once our little cyber attack goes through. Now that you've gone and destroyed the only physical evidence of their debt in your senselessly violent attack, the Council will have no choice but to go without their contribution. What was it your human government said about taxation and representation? If I had to pick one thing the Xenos did right, it'd be their anti-corruption laws. One does not simply buy a council representative, and anyone who tried faced prison time, no exceptions. Naturally, this came as an unpleasant surprise to corporate scumbags who had pulled that shit easily on their worlds pre-contact. The Old Guard was a group formed by drug lords, CEOs, and the elite of different planets with the sole objective of keeping corruption alive and well. "How are things on your end?" I asked. "Smooth sands," replied Wibbick, the metaphor a callback to his species' desert-dwelling history. Thanks in part to your tireless efforts, we've shown reason, with mountains of credits attached, to 9 council representatives. The old guard was meticulous about hiding their exploits. They didn't bribe anyone they couldn't blackmail at the same time, and threats of a convenient human mauling were usually enough to keep their lips, or whatever the hell else they had, sealed. Human testimonies weren't admissible in court either, so even if one of my men who knew the truth got caught and fessed up, the courts wouldn't be able to make anything stick. 9 council members under the old guard's thumb was a good start, but not nearly enough to achieve our mutual goal. And once you and your people own the council, you'll remember what you promised us, right? I probed, seeking to reaffirm the final terms of our deal. Human liberation will be among the first things they vote for, and it will be unanimous. You have my word, grinned Wibbick, downing his glass of whiskey and pouring another. No offense, I began, pausing to sip down my own drink. But I'm gonna need a little more than your word to stake the future of my people on. A show of good faith would be well appreciated. Clearly, the old guard representative found my request to be amusing, as immediately he began repeatedly chuffing in his species equivalent of a laugh. Xander, after all we've done for you, you still don't trust us? He asked, placing a hand over his chest in feigned offense. Do you want an honest answer to that? I grinned in reply, tossing a small thumb drive onto the table. These supplies should be nothing for you to grab. Come on. Have we ever been anything short of reliable? I suppose not, hummed Wibbick, slotting the thumb drive into his wrist-mounted computer and looking over the listed provisions. Even still, this is all cutting-edge hardware. I appreciate your faith in me, but these things are far from nothing for us to attain. He continued, batting my request around in his head like a cat toying with its prey. Swirling the remains of my whiskey in its glass, I regarded my contact with an unimpressed scowl. Oh, please. We're the damn reason those military contractors who joined up with you guys still have a business. The way I see it, they owe us. Seeing that I wasn't willing to back down, Wibbick's eyes flickered with what I could only pin as amusement. You know, my people have a saying. When you travel through the underworld, who better to have your back than a demon? Loyalty and camaraderie are important things in our line of work, he explained, rounding the table and placing one of his weird paw hands on my shoulder, gripping just tightly enough that I felt the claws digging in. You, Xander, are more than an accomplice. You are a friend. If I must prove this to you, then so be it. We'll have these supplies ready for you by the end of your next assignment. Gently shrugging off his unwanted gesture, I nodded appreciatively to Wibbick. One last thing, I continued, using the generosity of my ally as a springboard. The Megalodon's FTL drive is fucked. You wouldn't happen to know of any unguarded auto shipyards, would you? Unguarded is a bit of a strong term, replied the Keyfault, uploading some information onto the thumb drive I'd given him before tossing it back to me. This one has a fleet of drones defending it, but if you can bust past them, the code on the last file should override any service locks. I owe you one, I sighed in relief, accepting the thumb drive and slipping it into my pocket. I don't suppose you have any more pesky politicians you'd like me to pop as penance? Again, chuffing with laughter, Wibbick waved his claws dismissively. We're drawing up the plans for something now. Just keep on your toes, human, and try not to die. I make no promises, I replied, standing up to conclude our meeting with a customary wave, imitating the movement of a satisfied Keyfault's tail. Then, exiting the old guard's base, I returned to my ship to relay the good news to my lieutenants. Talia, Domestic Human, December 2nd, Earth Year, 2103. After receiving that package, I slept on it for almost a week, literally, given that I hid it under my pet bed. I didn't have a clue what was in there. I wasn't sure I wanted a clue. Nobody addressed packages to humans. Even if the message was for me, usually it would be addressed to Prosure. Whatever they were, the contents of that small box held the potential to change everything, and that terrified me. Maybe from the outside looking in this would sound crazy, but there were fates significantly worse than my own. Much as I complained internally about Prosure's role as my master, he was far from tyrannical in his treatment. Despite the immense disparity between us, both in terms of legality and physical strength, the Jacovian never forced me to do anything. Sometimes, when I curled up beside him and he scratched my back as we watched movies, I could almost deceive myself into liking him. He was sweet in his own way, although perhaps that was just the pills talking. Even if I was totally on board with going against Proshur, I had no way of knowing if that box contained anything good. Each time I pondered what could be inside, rumors of humans being abducted and sold under the table rang in my head. Under the Council, we still had certain protections. For one thing, it was illegal to force a human to work against their will, meaning that technically we weren't slaves. That being said, as the most intelligent species still classified as animals, humans were much more vulnerable to genuine slave trafficking, as the punishment for enslaving us was a lengthy prison sentence rather than the death one would invite buying and selling's Sapience. What if this was just a ploy to capture me? If I was lucky, I'd be made into an actual slave, forced to mine for the rest of my life, which wouldn't be long given how dangerous such a job would be. If I was unlucky, they'd cut off my thumbs and I'd be used as a broodmare at an illegal human mill. Each night I'd unearth the box from beneath my bed and turn it over in my grasp. What harm could there be in just having a look? It felt decently heavy and rattled slightly when shook, which meant it probably wasn't just a note. On the third night after receiving this package, my curiosity almost got the better of me, and I found myself peeling back the tape, only to immediately reapply it as my nerve disappeared into the darkness. Maybe freedom or death sounded good to some people, but when what was in that box could be either one, opening it wasn't so tempting. Proshur was home almost every day of that week. Apparently, the end of the Council's legislative year meant that all outstanding bills were being rolled over to the next one, effectively giving him the week off, save for a handful of short online meetings during which he locked himself in his office. Sitting outside the door, I could vaguely hear him chewing out planetary officials, though I couldn't tell what for. From what I could gather during my lengthy captivity, Proshur's harshness was the main reason people liked him so much. Proshur was an aggressive defender of anti-corruption laws, social services, and sapient rights, or at least rights for species the Council deemed to be sapient. If only he had extended that same fervor to the plight of humanity. When at last the meeting ended, and Proshur stepped out to find me waiting by the door, he knelt down and tenderly placed his palm upon my cheek. "Hello, Talia. Is there anything I can do for you, my pet?" Raising my chin upwards and pointing to my throat, I indicated for the Jakuvian to enable my ability to speak, and immediately he understood, producing his phone and turning off my vocal suppressor. "I need to talk to you," I told him, staring at his shoulder to avoid eye contact. "Of course," he nodded, taking my hand into his own and guiding me over to the dinner table before bringing 2 seats close together and setting me down into one of them. Whenever he didn't have guests over, Proshur would let me eat at the same table as him, yet another act of decency masquerading as some great charity. "You've been distant as of late. Are you all right?" Part of me wanted to tell Proshur about the package, to surrender my final shred of independence and let him handle it. Last time things changed, it wasn't for the better, and really I had no reason to think this change would be any different. Opening my mouth to confess, I felt the words die in my throat and resurrect as something altogether different. "Why aren't we good enough?" I asked him, my voice quivering involuntarily. "Humans, I mean." Immediately, the Jakuvian understood what I was talking about, and for a moment I saw him reach for his phone again with the intention of silencing me. However, just as his claw hung over the touchscreen, he took another look at my teary eyes and hesitated, before putting it back away and reaching out to grab my hand once more. "It's not that you aren't good enough," he replied, his tone even and kind as he spoke to me. I wanted so badly to hate him, but somehow I couldn't bring myself to. Goodness has nothing to do with sapience. Believe me, if it did, then half the people I meet at work would be in a zoo. "You know what I mean," I growled, refusing his tacit offer of a more light-hearted tone with as much clarity as I could. This wasn't a joke, and I wasn't going to let him make it into one. Why is it so important that a sapient species understand Archeron's law? For a moment, I saw the Jakuvian's jaw tighten, his eyes flickering with something I couldn't identify. What wasn't he about to tell me? "Talia, let's drop this for now, all right? What's one thing I can do right this moment to make you less tense?" "You can tell me, we made a decision!" he snapped, his voice raised to a degree of harshness I'd never known from him. An involuntary whimper escaped my throat as I recoiled away, my mind lighting up with primordial fear at the sight of his razor-sharp teeth bared angrily at me. Remorse softened Prochure's actions as he pulled me close to provide comfort the same way a human would do after accidentally stepping on their dog's paw. "I'm sorry, I'm so sorry," I yelled. "I didn't mean it." Rage bubbled within me at this coddling display as I shoved the Jacuvian away from me. I wasn't nearly strong enough to actually force him to let go, but Prochure seemed to get the message nevertheless. "You don't get to be sorry," I growled at my master, determined to stand my ground against him. "You voted to strip my species of our personhood. The least you can do is tell me why." Prochure huffed and he puffed, and his shoulders slumped down in defeat. "It's a complicated issue," he sighed, looking upon me with an expression of restrained frustration. "Multifaceted. I wouldn't expect you to understand." "Right, because I'm just a dumb animal, aren't I?" I shot back rhetorically. To my surprise, Prochure actually shook his head. "No, Talia, you're a very, very smart animal. Too smart, perhaps, for your own good." "The hell is that supposed to mean?" I hissed just before he tapped the button on his phone to silence me once more. With my ability to question him gone, Prochure gently bumped his soggy nose against my forehead in a gesture of strong affection. "Here," he said, parting the pantry door and producing from within a stick of my favorite jerky before gently setting it down in front of me. "Take this and go lay down. I'll wake you when dinner's ready." Seeing that dialogue would get me no further, I resigned myself to accepting the treat, taking a bite out of the dried morsel as I returned defeated to my bed and laid down to try and sleep. As I tossed and turned, the imprint of the package beneath my bedding poked at me relentlessly, practically begging for my attention. Peering down the hall to ensure Prochure wasn't about to catch me in the act, I produced the box from beneath my bedding and turned it over in my grasp for what must have been the 10th time. Peeling away the tape weakened by my previous exploration, I carefully pried open the top flap, and by the evening light peered inside to find a thick, heavy-looking device with an old-fashioned green screen. Plucking it out for a closer look, I was shocked to see text fluttering across the machine's face. "I was worried you wouldn't open this." The text spelled out again, casting a worried glance down the kitchen hallway. I turned my back to it and surveyed the device's buttons. At first glance, it looked like a primitive handheld game console, 2 buttons on one side and a directional pad on the other. "Sorry for the inconvenient layout," continued the text. "It's much less suspicious this way." Pressing down on the A button, I cocked my head curiously as a basic keyboard appeared on screen just below the text itself. It had been a long time since I'd written anything, and the lingering damage to my frontal lobe definitely didn't help with spelling, but eventually I managed to get a basic sentence down. "Who are you?" "A kindred spirit," replied the text, its answer just vague enough to spark my curiosity. "Someone who can help you." "Help with what?" I asked, attempting to murmur beneath my breath as I typed, only to be thwarted by my speech suppressor. For a moment, the words I had typed lingered above the keyboard as whoever was on the other end formulated their response. "Freedom," it replied. Immediately, my heart began to beat rapidly with excitement, pumping blood icy with terror through my veins. "You help." "Humans aren't the only sapients the Council denies," replied the text. "And you're not the only ones who want to make things better." Seductive though this notion of rebellion was, whoever was trying to sell me on it clearly didn't think through their lie very well. Humans were the only species with written language to ever be denied sapience. There were no others. "Uli," I typed, dropping the device back into its box and picking it up to bring it to Prochure. If this was an act of attempted human trafficking, then the Jacuvian councilman would be able to bring it to the attention of law enforcement. Prochure must have thought I'd gone to sleep, because as I approached the kitchen I could hear him talking on the phone. "Dr. Thalm," he began, confirming the person on the other end to be my veterinarian. "Yes, it's Prochure. I'm calling you because I am concerned about Talia. She's barely eating, and it's clear something is irritating her. Yes, even with the pills. I'm concerned it might be more of a psychological problem. I've heard that some humans who survived Archeron law testing suffered from a resurgence in symptoms." Caution halted my steps as I leaned against the wall to keep out of the Jacuvian's sight as he continued. "That seems a little extreme. Are you sure you can't just up the dosage?" "Yes, I want her quality of life to be higher, but frontal lobe reduction procedures are irreversible." Those words rattled furiously through my skull, drying up my throat and nearly causing me to choke on my own spit. On very rare occasions, humans who suffered from intense psychological problems were forced to undergo frontal lobe reduction. I'll spare you the technical jargon. It's basically a lobotomy. The procedure was highly regulated and could only be done with express permission from a professional board. To have such a thing recommended for me by Dr. Thalm meant that he already had that permission. My heart refused to beat as I listened intently to the conversation. Surely Procure would never do something like that to me. He valued my intelligence. We played board games together. Surely he'd say no, right? And you're confident this won't harm her in any way? Procure sighed in concession upon whatever response was then given. Fine. I can bring her in tomorrow for an evaluation. I suppose you should have it ready just in case. But I swear, if she has so much as a headache afterwards... Yes, I know you graduated from Quesmacath. No need to remind me. From the way he talked, it didn't sound like Procure was enthusiastic to have such a procedure performed on me, but the fact that he didn't refuse it outright nevertheless left my skin crawling. Backing away from the kitchen entrance, I slipped into the coat closet and once again produced the mysterious device, my hands trembling as I typed. My master wants to fucking debrain me, I entered, not even about to attempt the spelling of lobotomize. Unfortunate, replied whoever was on the other end. I'm assuming you're referring to a frontal lobe reduction. Given your history of brain damage, it's unlikely such a procedure would go well for you. Though I suppose someone who lies like I apparently do has no reason to care. Have fun trying not to drool on the carpet. My eyes widened in terror as I typed in a frantic wait, desperately hoping that my only lifeline wouldn't abandon me so easily. Please help me! Minutes crawled by like hours as I waited for a response from whoever this was. Once I was sure they weren't going to be saying anything back, I began to sob silently. Then, at last, a new set of text flashed in front of me. Apologies. I was just testing to see if you actually wanted this, they replied. The screen in front of me suddenly filled by a pixelated compass with a solid arrow pointing north and a blinking one pointing somewhere else. Follow that blinking arrow. Once you get to where I am, I can disable your translator's tracking and anti-speech functions. Good luck! With that, my benefactor's text disappeared, leaving behind only the compass and an immense urge to get the hell out of Procure's manor.